Yes, good afternoon, everyone, and Happy New Year. I'd like to begin by just saying we are delighted to offer you an additional post-holiday gift. Today, we are honored to have our colleagues from Grable Foundation who have, for the past few years, offered us an opportunity annually to have a conversation with a distinguished member of our community. And today, we are just as happy as we can be to welcome Gregg Behr and Ryan, who are our partners in crime, and they have a special guest for us today that they have agreed to just share time with us and share knowledge with us. We don't think he's a stranger to you, although, like me, you've perhaps never met him in person. But Sal Khan is our special guest for today. We want to preserve as much time as we can for that conversation. So, again, thanking the Grable Foundation, thanking Sal, thanking our folks as well for making this possible. Gregg, we are ready to begin.
And thank you so much. Ryan and I are so grateful to be here with you and grateful to AASA for so many things. Among those, certainly the public education promise, and grateful to be part of it all. I'm Gregg. I'm together with Ryan, the co-author of When You Wonder You're Learning. And for the past number of years, we've had the great pleasure of hosting some annual webinars with all of you, bringing some of the brightest minds in America to conversation as we think about the learning landscape across this incredible nation. You may remember last year we were with New York Times columnist David Brooks, and the year before that, U.S. Surgeon General Dr. Vivek Murthy. And today, the person making me nervous is Dr. Sal Khan because he's joined us, and Ryan and I are going to be in conversation with Sal for the next half hour or so, and then we're going to be taking your questions. So beginning now, start putting your questions into the chat. And Ryan, can I turn to you for introductions, please?
Sure. Yeah, as Anne mentioned, Sal is someone who needs no introduction, but I will give you a very brief one just in case. Sal is the founder and CEO of the Khan Academy, which is a nonprofit that provides free world-class education for anyone, anywhere. He founded it in 2008, and it has grown into this global phenomenon, a learning platform used by people in nearly 200 countries. Khan Academy offers free interactive exercises, instructional videos, teacher tools across subjects like math, science, humanities, writing, SAT prep, you name it. Schools, as many of you on this call already know, school districts use Khan Academy's offerings for, such as Khan Academy districts and Khan Academy kids to support teachers and students. And in addition to Khan Academy, Sal also founded or co-founded three additional educational nonprofits, including the Khan Lab School, which is an experimental school in California, Schoolhouse.world, which connects students for free live peer-to-peer tutoring and civil dialogue. And he's been recognized as one of Time's 100 most influential people in the world. He's been featured on 60 Minutes, CNN, the New York Times, the Washington Post, Fox Business, Education Week, all the places. He holds 3 degrees from MIT, math, electrical engineering, and computer science, and an MBA from Harvard Business School. He lives in Mountain View, California, where he's joining us from today with his wife and his 3 children. So please give a warm virtual welcome to Mr. Sal Khan. Thank you so much for joining us.
No, honored to be here. And I'm glad that I'm making Gregg nervous. I strive to be as intimidating as possible.
Exactly. So, Sal, I'm guessing most people watching this have some idea who you are and what you do. And we're going to get into your background in just a minute or so. But we want to start with something that's top of mind all across the education field, and that's AI. You just released your third book, and this one is co-authored with a handful of some really amazing experts and educators. That book is called Teaching Students to Use AI Ethically and Responsibly. And it's those last three words in particular that stood out to us. So, when you think about how to prepare young people for this AI-driven world, what does it mean to do so ethically and responsibly?
Yeah, well, I think there's a bunch of dimensions to that, and I'm not going to claim that I have the perfect crystal ball here. Things are changing so fast. But the best guess that I have, or best sense that I have, and we obviously try to keep pretty close to it. I think, first of all, if you're really talking about preparing students for this future world, I think there's still a very strong there should still be a very strong emphasis on the basics. I think some people have made the argument, oh, in an AI world, AI can write for you, AI can do your research for you, AI can do your math for you, et cetera. Do people have to learn those things anymore? And I'm a big believer that if you actually have those skills yourself, and if you have the content knowledge, you're going to be in a better position to use it. This isn't the first time that we've seen this type of phenomena. Back when the calculator came out in the late 60s, early 70s, people said, no one has to learn arithmetic anymore. Well, it turns out that the people who use a calculator well, or even are in a position to use a calculator or computing, are actually the people who did know their arithmetic well. When the internet comes out and Google and web search, people said, oh, no one has to know their content anymore. They can just search for it. But it turns out, one, to put yourself in a position where you are in a knowledge job, but even more, to do it well, you actually do have to have good content knowledge. You can tell someone who's searching, who has no sense of what they're searching for, versus someone who has the right skills, who has some background knowledge. They're able to go much, much further. And I think in a world where AI, it will raise the floor. It can come up with a first draft. It can do all of these things, but you're not going to get the most out of it unless you can keep up with it, or ideally even be better. As I say, all of us are going to get into being editors. Instead of being the coders, we'll be the architects. And no one wants an editor who can't write as well as the staff writer, which is now going to be the AI. No one wants the coding architect who can't code as well or think as well as the junior coder, which is now going to be the AI. So first and foremost, the basic skills, I think, are as important as ever, and that's where Khan Academy is very focused on math and English and language arts and science, etc. Above and beyond that, in this, my second book, Brave New Words, is very much about how can we use AI in education, especially for accelerating some of the traditional skills that I just talked about. As you mentioned, this newest kind of educator-focused book is focused. It really is a manual of what you can do in the classroom, and there's really several dimensions there. There is learning about AI. It is important, I think, for people to even know what AI is. It isn't a sentient being, but it is. These large language models, they are modeled after how the human brain works, the same way that we have neurons and synapses. When people talk about this model has 1 trillion parameters, those parameters are numbers that represent how strong the synapses are between different nodes. So there's definitely an analog here. So there's that thing, and I think it is valuable for people to learn. Everyone doesn't have to become an AI researcher, but people should know the basics of what they're dealing with and how does it train, et cetera, and what are its limitations. Then there's learning traditional skills with AI, and that's a lot of what Khan Academy has been focused on. And then the last piece is learning to use AI, and that's the way that you do that ethically and responsibly. Well, the middle one, learning traditional content leveraging AI, the way you do that ethically and responsibly is make sure that you have you're very careful with student data, that it's not going out to the models, that they can't train off of that. Making sure that there's transparency, especially if we're talking about students under 18, transparency to teachers and administrators as to what's going on. Make sure that ideally you have good moderation, so students can't even engage in unconstructive conversations with the AI or cheat with the AI. And even that transparency helps prevent a lot of that. So that's on that level. And on that last level of learning to use AI generally, this is, we have activities by grade level in that workbook where we talk about, okay, for a 12th grader, here's a research activity that you could do with them. And it's make sure that they learn how to validate information. Make sure that they, this is something that we adults need to do. In the early days of generative AI, like 2 years ago, there was that story about that lawyer who used one of these models to write a brief, and it cited all sorts of Supreme Court cases, et cetera, and it made it all up. Well, that's embarrassing for that lawyer. We don't want any of us or any of our students to be in that type of a position. We don't want any of them to be, it's good to get started. We don't want them to be over-reliant. We want them to be able to make sense of things, validate information. And I'll say one last thing, these skills also are not new to AI. I think AI kind of puts them to the fore, but even pre-generative AI, when you do a web search, we know sometimes you're not getting the best information. When you go on social media, we know that there's a lot of misinformation. Even when you hang out with your family at Thanksgiving, There's a lot of misinformation. So you have to have that muscle, ideally, of like, I don't know if that's true. If I'm going to index on that, let me go find some more credible sources and validate that.
Thank you. So we're going to come back and unpack a lot of that in a little bit, but I want to call out something that you mentioned a few times, and that is this concept of the basics. And the basics are something that you've been thinking about for a long time, right? Before ChatGPT, before one-to-one devices, even before Khan Academy was Khan Academy. And I'm wondering if could you briefly just take us back to the beginning? We understand you got your start not because you set out to help millions of people learn, which you eventually did, but because you wanted to help one person learn. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, it was back in 2004. I was a year out of business school. I was working as an analyst at a hedge fund, and it just came out of conversation at my wedding in 2004 that my 12-year-old cousin Nadia was having trouble with math.
Hmm.
I offer to help her. She agrees. She was in New Orleans, where I was born and raised. I was in Boston at the time. And I started tutoring her. And slowly but surely, she got caught up with her class, even ahead of her class. At that point, I became what I call a tiger cousin. I called up her school. I'm sure all the administrators listening love these calls. And I said, I think my relative is more capable than you. But it was true. And they surprised. They said, "Who are you?" I said, "I'm her cousin." And maybe the novelty, you usually get a parent who thinks their child is a genius, but this was a cousin. Maybe there was some novelty there. And I explained how I was tutoring her, and they allowed Nadia to retake a placement exam. It put her into it took her out of essentially the remedial track and put her into the advanced track. And so, I was hooked. I started tutoring her younger brothers too. Word spreads in my family. Free tutoring is going on. I end up tutoring 5, 10 cousins, family, friends every day after work. And then this was now 2004, 2005. I saw a pattern, and a lot of the educators here, I'm sure, have seen it. My cousins weren't struggling because they weren't bright, because they weren't hardworking, because they didn't have access to good schools. They had all of those things, but they were still struggling. And especially, I think it happens in all subjects, but I think especially in math or subjects that are closely related to math, what happens is you have some gaps in foundational things. And later on, if you're in algebra class, but you forgot how to divide decimals, or you're kind of shaky on it, and all of a sudden you have to divide decimals in that algebra equation, well, you're going to have trouble. And it's hard for the algebra teacher to address that need, because in that class of 30, one student has a gap in dividing decimals, which isn't even in the curriculum. Another student's having trouble with negative exponents. Another student's having trouble with logarithms. How do you handle that? And traditionally, the only way is to give everyone a tutoring. And so I said, well, even with 10 cousins, it was hard for me as a part-time tutor, a volunteer tutor for my family. I said, well, what if I could write a little software for me to help figure out what their gaps are, and for them to get practice on it when we're out of the session. And so that was the first Khan Academy. And I had admittedly created what have now evolved into our teacher tools and teacher dashboards, because I wanted to keep track of what my cousins were doing. And it did help me when I got on the phone with them to go deeper and to really focus on what they needed. And then in 2006, by this point, we had moved out here to Northern California, and I was showing off this software at a dinner party. And I'm a super fun dinner party guest. And the host said, "Hey, Sal, this is cool software you're making, but how are you scaling your lessons?" And I said, "I'm not. It's hard to even do the logistics of scheduling." And he said, "Well, why don't you also make videos for your family and upload them onto YouTube?" I initially thought it was a horrible idea. YouTube did not seem like a serious platform for learning at the time, but I gave it a shot anyway. And my cousins famously said, after made about 50 videos, I was doing worked examples for them and things like that, that they like me better on YouTube than in person. And I think what they were saying, in fact, I know what they were saying, is they still valued me in their life. In fact, because of the videos, we were able to go deeper into their motivation and what was going on in their life when we got on the phone. We were able to connect more as human beings. But they really valued having an on-demand explanation, being able to review something where they might have been embarrassed even telling me that they forgot how to do that thing from 5th grade. They could pause and repeat. They could do it at 11 p.m. We didn't have to worry about logistics. So I took that as positive feedback, and I kept going. And I kept working on the software, and still I think the core of Khan Academy really is the deliberative practice at someone's learning edge. But the videos, as many people know, took a life of their own. They were easy to discover. Still, tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of people every year use that as, quick help, et cetera, et cetera. But we've always been trying to bring them into doing deeper and deeper engagement so that they can really accelerate their learning.
I want to go back to that moment. You're the well-versed, wickedly smart tiger cousin, right? And there's just a 4-year period until the Khan Academy launches. And of course, you're learning by doing, and you commented about the patterns that you're learning. Um, and I'm sure you look back at yourself at that time and I didn't know about this whole field of the learning sciences and child development. So, where do the educational practices and learning practices come in the course of that journey? And how do they influence those early years in the iterative design of the Khan Academy?
Yeah, what I've now appreciated is that I was going down in a very iterative and intuitive way, a path. I wasn't the first person to think of any of these things. People have been talking about personalized learning forever. I would argue that for most of human history, personalized learning was considered the way to learn. If you go back 2,300 years, Alexander the Great, before he became great, his tutor was Aristotle. And you can that would have been personalized learning. If young Alexander needed to speed up, I'm sure Aristotle would have sped up. If he had some gaps, he would have slowed down. If he was a little unmotivated, he would have figured out a way to motivate. But very few people could get that type of education. Essentially, young princes and nobility could, but most people didn't. You fast forward to about 300 years ago, 300 years ago, we have a very utopian idea. We should give everyone educations. We should try to get literacy rates from 20%, which is where they were in most of the world, to 100%. And that's where we introduce mass free public education, which has done huge positive things for society. I mean, the literacy rates, it's no coincidence that the first societies to introduce mass public education, we're talking about, Prussia, which later kind of evolved into modern Germany, the UK, Japan, United States. These are also the first societies to create a broad-based middle class and to have a stable democracies, et cetera, et cetera. So they've done very positive things, but there were compromises that had to be made 300 years ago. They said, look, we don't have the resources to give everyone their own Aristotle, but it's the Industrial Revolution. They didn't call it that, but it's the Industrial Age. We could maybe batch students together. We could have some state mandated processes, move them forward, and have some assessments sporadically to see how it's going. And, we'll kind of sort students maybe around age 12, 13. The ones who seem to get it all, we'll sort them into this track. They'll go to college and maybe go into some of the knowledge work. These folks will go into work at the factories. These folks might go into the trades, et cetera, et cetera. And, the system has worked for us in a lot of very positive ways. But as you can imagine, when you do that lockstep, a lot of the times why students start to struggle isn't because they're destined to not be able to master algebra. It's because they had gaps. And, it's been a source of inequity because middle class and upper middle class and affluent families have always known that if my child is struggling in school, either I as a parent or as a cousin will tutor them, or I will go hire someone to tutor my and do that personalized learning essentially.
Yeah.
And so, I was going down this same journey, and Benjamin Bloom famously wrote about mastery learning back in 1984, but he called it the 2 sigma problem, because even though he made a solid argument that you could get a 2 standard deviation improvement, he said it was a problem because we can't give everyone their own personal tutor. But he did even then say, well, maybe software could approximate some aspects of it. And that was essentially the path that Khan Academy had been going on and has continued to go down.
So you launched Khan Academy in 2008. And it blows up over the next 2 decades. You had tens of millions, then hundreds of millions of people. And over time, it's professionalized and systematized and studied. You have data showing that this stuff really works. And at some point, you start working with it's not just kids watching you on YouTube. You're working with entire school districts. Can you tell us a little bit about what Khan Academy does with and for districts today?
Yeah, and it's been an evolution even from those very early days. I think it was 2007. I was still me, just operating in actually this walk-in closet, and I had created teacher tools for myself. But I was starting to get pretty eager about using it in real classrooms. And there was a teacher, John Mormino, who taught 5th grade math at Sidwell Friends in Washington, D.C., who I was connected with. And he's like, well, I would love to use your thing. And he started using it. And that was the first positive feedback that I got. It's like, okay, this can really work in a mainstream classroom with 25, 30 students. then, as you said, 2008, I set it up as a nonprofit, mission-free, world-class education for anyone, anywhere. 2010, we got our first real funding from some foundations, Google, Gates Foundation, et cetera. And from the get-go, that those early tools that I had built for myself and I had built for John Mormino evolved into our teacher tools, and we had hundreds of thousands, if not millions of teachers around the world electing to use Khan Academy. And we did multiple efficacy studies, as you mentioned, that were showing that if students put in even 30 to 60 minutes a week, they were getting accelerated, depending on the study, someplace between 20 and 40% over the course of a year. And there's been some recent studies that have been even more profound than that. But then you fast forward to about 7 years ago. This was a couple of years before the pandemic. And we realized that our board, I feel lucky because a lot of my friends who run for-profit companies, their boards are always telling them, hey, when are you going to turn a profit? Our board is, hey, let's make sure that we're really reaching all the students that we need to reach. And we started having conversations like, it's great that a lot of teachers on their own and a lot of students on their own are using Khan Academy, but we really care about our mission, which is the same as the mission of everyone listening. Like, how do we move the dial for all students? And we came to the conclusion that, well, to do that, we have to work more systemically with school districts. So we started calling up superintendents, chief academic officers, maybe some of the folks listening, and every conversation went very similar. Immediately when we got on, the superintendent or the chief academic officer would say, oh, Mr. Khan, before we start, let me just tell you, my niece says that you really helped her with the SAT, or, my son says this, or, there's even some younger administrators said, oh, you helped me get through grad school. So it's always nice to start a conversation like that. It's like, okay, this will be a good conversation. And then we say, okay, well, here, it sounds like you're already familiar with our platform. Here's our efficacy studies. What would it take for you to use us district-wide? And we're not selling you anything. We're a nonprofit. It actually, the more you use us, I'm going to have to go raise more money. I don't get paid more, anything like that. And they almost unanimously said, well, we believe you work and your efficacy studies are very sound, but if you really want us to use you, we need support, we need training, we need integration with our rostering systems, we need district level dashboards. You need a, so let me turn this thing off. Sorry, let me get my phone going. Jump. Oh, yeah, sorry about that.
You look good.
We need, we need to sign the data privacy agreements, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's where we started about 7 years ago, said, okay, we need to build this enterprise muscle. And so that's been the journey that you're describing. And so now there's, I think it's approaching 500 school districts with, as of right now, almost I think it's someplace between 1.3 and 1.5 million students in those formal partnerships that we're now working with to, do that rostering with the district, have those district level dashboards so that the administrators can see everything that's going on, doing the training, partnering with these districts to make sure that we're seeing the level of engagement necessary to really start to drive learning outcomes.
You've been so iterative in this work. I mean, it's constantly evolving. I think about starting with one person, now working with complex and complicated school systems and cohorts of systems. And you're dealing with ever-changing technologies, which brings us right back to AI, because it was 3 years ago that you launched Khanmigo, which is your AI tool that you developed alongside OpenAI. Can you tell us about that, what it's doing, how you're using it, and where it's going?
Yeah, and the one thing I always remind myself, remind the Khan Academy team, and remind everyone we're talking to is technology can be very seductive. Even before generative AI, obviously people talk about software and the internet and video and all of this. It's very, and I'm guilty of it too, of sometimes getting seduced by the technology. Like, this is so cool. There's got to be a use for this. But it's always important to take a step back and say, no, what are the problems that we think are really worth solving? And then let's solve it in the simplest possible way. And for us, as we've been talking about, the true north has always been, we believe, and there's a lot of research evidence, including now many research studies on Khan Academy in particular, that show if you are able to meet students where they are, if you're able to both let them work at grade level, but also fill in gaps. And after the pandemic, a lot of folks have talked about unfinished learning, and this has been a tension people have been struggling with. How do you make sure people do grade level at the same time, fill in any gaps that they might have? And sometimes these gaps are substantial in fact, in most cases, they're substantial for a lot of kids. and our view has been it's personalization, but it's personalization as part of an ecosystem with a teacher, students, administrators. So that was our true north. Now enter, in summer of 2022. This is 6 months before ChatGPT comes out, before the world wakes up to generative AI. I get an email from Gregg Brockman and Sam Altman at OpenAI talking about, hey, they have a new model coming out, the one that would eventually become GPT-4. They thought that this is pretty powerful. They wanted to show it to us and see if we had any use for it because they wanted to launch with socially positive use cases, and they thought of us. So when they showed it to it, we're all used to it now. But when I saw that with a little bit of prompting, it could get even closer to emulating what Aristotle might have done in some ways for young Alexander. I think a valid critique of Khan Academy has been, okay, it's great that students can learn, get exercises at their own pace, or get hints and get solutions, or watch videos that are on demand. But what if a student has a little bit of an edge case question? I was like, yeah, well, hopefully they have their peers or their teacher for that. That was my answer before. But I was like, well, now they can ask the AI these things. The AI also had a bunch of issues, especially at those early stages. It was making math errors. It was making up facts. It was, there's definitely, and what about safety, privacy, young people, all the things we were talking about earlier. And, our view was, and we started having all the, could we use this cheating tool, which I think, unfortunately, is probably its main use case in education right now. And our team, we had signed all the non-disclosure agreements. No one knew about that this was happening, but we saw this is a tsunami that's about to hit everyone, including education. We had all these debates, and you could imagine Khan Academy, not for profit. We attract a very passionate, mission-driven team who really cares about doing things right. And but I encouraged our team. I was like, look, these are legitimate fears. I have those same fears, but we can't use those as a reason to run away from this technology. If anything, we have a role. Hopefully people trust us. They know our motivation isn't to, quote, sell them anything. Our motivation is to help move outcomes. We should turn those fears into features. Let's make, when people engage with our AI, make it transparent to the teachers, administrators. Our AI should be Socratic and not give solutions. We could even come up with ways to prevent other forms of AI from being used. We shouldn't share our data, et cetera, et cetera. And so as we went down that journey and launched Khanmigo, was interesting. We were bracing ourselves because we knew that AI wasn't perfect. And to be clear, Khanmigo isn't a solution by itself. It's part of everything that we're doing at Khan Academy. And I still think that the main learning that we're seeing in all the efficacy studies happens from that deliberative practice using our traditional exercises. But if that AI could be one extra layer of support above the videos for motivation, to give insights to the teachers, to help them save time with things like lesson planning, that could be great. But we were bracing for ourselves for like, oh, maybe people are going to really hate us for jumping on the AI bandwagon, or maybe even leading the AI bandwagon in some ways. But I think, it was interesting. ChatGPT had come out in November of 2022, and most people don't realize it was a bit of an accident because we were supposed to launch Khanmigo the same day that GPT-4 was going to launch, which was going to be March of 2023. So November 30th, 2022, no one expected anything to launch. I was upset because they had us all lawyered up, and I messaged the OpenAI. I was like, "What have y'all done? Y'all launched something?" They're like, "We didn't launch anything. We just put a chat interface on one of our older models, and the whole world has exploded." And I was like, "Oh no!" Because this thing didn't have the guardrails. This thing wasn't designed for education. It was actually using an older model that had made more hallucinations, even was worse at math. And you immediately saw the headlines, people banning it at schools, et cetera. I actually think for good reason. And I was like, oh no, we're putting so much effort into this. But in some ways it was a blessing. By the time we launched 3 months later, I think a lot of educators, a lot of probably the people on this webinar kind of came around full circle. They're like, yeah, we have to be careful with this. It can be a cheating tool. It does have misinformation, but if we use it right, one, it can maybe help us accelerate our traditional learning, and we can't ignore this because this is going to be a part of students' lives going forward. So when we launched something that had guardrails, took a lot more care to put the safety there, that actually was not AI by itself, but it was built on a platform that had a ton of efficacy around it. That we actually got a better reception, pretty substantially. So what was I'm losing my train of thought. What was the other part of the question?
Well, the optimism onto which you're holding.
Oh yes.
And
the
myth
optimism
history with
Oh yes.
need to let go of.
Yes. So, I gave that all of that preamble to say that, like, today we think AI is a nice to have, but not the game changer. But I think we can imagine a world, let's call it 5 years in the future, and it's not a world that's going to happen on its own. It's going to take all of us to work together to make it happen. Where I write in the book about assessment. Standardized assessment is not something that most people love, but I personally think it's necessary. When people say they don't like it, I was like, which part do you not like? The standardized part or the assessment part? Like, you have to assess something to understand where you are, and it's better to be standardized than not standardized. But I think what most people don't like about it is they standardized assessment today tends to be quite narrow. Oftentimes multiple choice questions, and and then you get the results at the end of the year, and then it's not necessarily actionable by that time. The kids are now going to move into another classroom, and what do? The teacher just has to go through the curriculum again. So I think AI actually has the opportunity of two things. One, creating types of standardized assessment that can be broader. We actually got a grant, a major grant. Reed Hastings from Netflix is the one who, it was actually his idea for us to create a new type of interim assessment, which we're actually going to be launching in this coming fall. If anyone wants to partner on this, pop us an email. I'm Sal at Khan Academy. I normally wouldn't do that for any crowd, but for this crowd, I would. Sal at Khan Academy. But the notion is, okay, we have to do an interim assessment in math and ELA that's similar enough to current assessments and similar enough to state assessments, so people can feel that they're a good proxy. But we also want to start broadening the aperture of what you can assess. And AI is powerful there, because now not only could you have a traditional multiple choice question, but you can ask a student to explain their reasoning. But you can ask a student to say, what do you think was the author's intention, and actually type it in. And then when the teachers and the administrators get the scores, they not only will get the traditional percentiles, growth, all the norming data, criteria-based data, but they can also get a narrative of, like, when we worked with the student, they seemed to make a lot of careless mistakes because they were able to explain their reasoning well, but they still missed some of these questions. And so I think that starts to get us into that broader aperture. And I can imagine in 5 or 10 years where you could have assessments, standardized assessments, where you're asking students to draw things, where you're asking students to explain things orally, act things out. I don't know, art is, and then people, when you have narrow assessments, classrooms oftentimes become narrower because, like, well, that's not on the state assessment, so let's not teach that thing anymore, even though it's probably important. But if the assessments get broader, then I think AI has an opportunity there. In terms of the biggest problem and I think misconception that I'm seeing right now, it is all around the cheating issue. This is most pronounced at a high school and definitely at a college level. If you get any college students in a room and they trust you, they will admit that they are all using ChatGPT or Gemini or whatever for most of their assignments. And the schools are somewhat oblivious to it. A misconception is that you can detect AI. You can't. These AI detectors have a 40% false positive rate. So there's actually a huge problem. I mean, 40% false positive means it's flipping a coin, whether you use AI or not. And there's actually these other technologies called humanizers, which are they know how these shady AI detectors work. So you just run your ChatGPT output through a humanizer, and every person under the age of 25 knows what I'm talking about. They're all using these humanizers. Your AI detector will never detect these. And so I think there has to be a real conversation in education. And maybe this is an overdue conversation of, okay, that take-home assignment, that essay, what were we doing it for in the first place? And if our goal, and I think it is a legitimate goal, is I want to make sure the student can construct their own thoughts from scratch and write it, then I think you're going to have to do some of that stuff in class now. And look, that's healthy, because now you're supported as opposed to going home, and if your mom happens to be an English teacher, great. But if they're at working long hours, too bad. If you're if you want a student to be able to do independent work outside of class, like a term paper, maybe use our writing coach where they're doing it with the AI, but the AI can make the process transparent to the teacher, which actually has benefits beyond even policing cheating. It can also tell the teacher, like, a lot of your students are still struggling with formulating a thesis statement. Why don't we modify tomorrow's lesson plan a little bit together, AI and teacher together, to really do, reteach that concept and really focus on it? Because traditionally an English teacher never got the process. They didn't know how long it was taking the students, who's struggling with what. And then I think there's a whole other category of assignments. And I think at the high school and college level, you should, where I think every class should have one assignment, a term at least, where they say, no, go use AI, go use whatever you can. But I want something that makes, that blows my mind. Instead of writing the business plan, go start the business. Or I want you to make an advertisement for it. Or I want you to, you should have a theme song, an advertisement. You should have vibe coded your original, your initial prototype. And, you should have tried to get some real users or something like that. But I think that's the mindset that we need to move to as educators.
Thank you. So we are just about out of time. I want to throw two more questions from the audience to you. One is likely a straightforward answer, and one is probably a bit more challenging. So first question, is Khanmigo free?
So this is, our mission as a nonprofit is free world-class education for anyone, anywhere. But the reality is, even 7 years ago, when a lot of these, to use Khan Academy, many people know it's free. And it's like, how can we be free? We're philanthropically supported primarily. But then when districts asked us for kind of bespoke training, integration with rostering systems, et cetera, we had to say, okay, we'll do that, but we have to make sure that we can at least cover the cost of doing that. Otherwise, we would just not exist. So that's where we are charging districts about $15 per student per year for all of that type of thing. Then when the AI came out, many folks remember it was initially very expensive. That first year we estimated just the computation cost, just what we would have had to pay Google or OpenAI or Microsoft and for the compute, we were estimating it was about $40 or $50 per year. And so we did have to pass that expense. Now, the good news is that those costs have come down, and we got a major grant from Microsoft. They gave us a $32 million grant as a nonprofit. Wow. That's allowed us to do two things. Now we're able to throw in all those AI costs and just throw that into kind of that bundle that we were doing for districts to begin with at that roughly $15. And for teachers and educators, it's free. It's globally. And we wouldn't have been able to do that without that major grant from Microsoft. So, credit to them.
That's great. Thank you. One last question. This comes from Matt. I think it's a really interesting, provocative question. If you had 1 year to change the trajectory of a struggling school, what would you do first?
Yeah, I mean, look, I would probably want to do a listening tour to understand where it's struggling, and it's usually very complex. It's usually not one thing, but we have seen, and I don't want to make it sound like Khan Academy is the solution for every problem, because it's not, but we are seeing in a lot of school districts in the United States, and actually now globally, if you were to have like a focused daily intervention of direct personalized practice on a platform like Khan Academy, and you have an administrator whose objective is to drive maximum engagement through that, we have seen that will drive the outcomes positively every time. There's I don't think, I'm not sure if this came out yet. Well, I could speak in generalities. It's about to be published in a journal, but in India, there was a study where they, these are schools that are super, if we talk about under-resourced schools in America, you should see those schools. So super under-resourced, et cetera. But they did this. They did very focused Khan Academy, and these are in some of these environments, they couldn't even find someone who knew algebra, et cetera, et cetera. So it's just very focused in there. And they've seen, when the study comes out, people will see some of the highest growth in test scores that people have seen in any academic study. And this was done by a third party, not done by us, et cetera, et cetera. So that's, so if I could wave a wand, I would do this deep intervention. If that wand was extra powerful, I would move to kind of competency-based grading versus seat time-based grading. What matters is, do you know the material, not how long you sat in the chair. If I waved my wand even more, we know that 40-50% of even the kids who decide to go to college, which is about the top 40 or 50% of students, when they go to college, they're not even placing into algebra, 9th, 10th grade math. They're placing into middle school math. This is where competency-based, kids are sitting through these classes called Algebra 1, Algebra 2, Geometry. Some are even taking pre-calculus and calculus, and then they're not even placing into algebra. That's a sign that we water things down. Kids have too many gaps. So I would move to competency. I would move to a world where we could even potentially give students credit while they are in high school, but credit not based on seat time, but based on real competency. And that's actually something we're exploring at Khan Academy. We're starting to work with districts on high school credit recovery, and then even potentially college credits based on their work.
Sal, what an hour. What a gift.
Yeah, thank
I
you.
imagine you're an extraordinary dinner party guest. I'd like to be at the dinner party. I could talk to you for hours over whatever beverage and meal. This has been extraordinary. And Ryan and I are so grateful to AASA for hosting this. I'll turn it back to you with just enormous thanks to Sal.
Enormous thanks to all of you, and especially to Gregg and Ryan for making this possible for our members. We represent people all across the United States who are dedicated to ensuring that our students are ready for the future. Sal, having an opportunity to hear from you makes this job even easier. So we thank you for the work that you're doing and for the work that you continue to do. Thank you, Gregg and Ryan, for making sure that we had a really informative session this afternoon. We have lots more questions, Sal. We can't get them all in, but we want to thank you for being available to us and for sharing your wisdom. On behalf of our CEO, who is Dave Schuler, and our Chief Learning Officer, Chris Gilmore, and our 10,000 members, we want to thank each of you for the contribution you've made to our professional development learning. It takes a lot to keep us engaged, but I will tell you, we were hanging on to every word, every question, every comment. Even during the time, Sal, when you left us briefly, we were still thinking about all the things that you shared with us. We want to remind those who are listening and to you also that we'll be posting this session for members to access again or to access the first time. And again, Gregg and Ryan, thank you for this opportunity. Thank you for continuing to support us. We hope everyone will have a great rest of the afternoon, and we look forward to hearing from our members as they access this session today.